Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Feeling and Healing podcast. I am Danielle Z, your host, MFT in the making, motivator, and mental health maven. And today I'm so happy to welcome Zen. She is a somatic guide. So, welcome, Zen.
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle.
Your name is like just like calming Zen. I love it. So, as you know, as a mental health professional, I'm always curious to know more about our bodies and our mind-body connection and the physiological. Could you just tell me how you started your work with somatics? I'm always curious to know, because it's such an important piece of our health that I think is not addressed as widely as it should be.
Yeah, so I guess it kind of came about because I kind of hit a little bit of a wall. So I had done a lot of my own intense therapy, EMDR and the journaling and the yoga and the meditation and the breath work, but I was still feeling stuck, and I was still feeling like anxious and sometimes sadness, and without much of a cause, everything was okay in my life. The therapy really made such a difference, such a transformation, but I was still feeling a lot of these familiar feelings in my body, and I couldn't understand why. And the harder I pushed and I tried to kind of just work through them and do more of the work, the more resistance was coming up. And
Mm.
it took me a while to realize that my nervous system hadn't caught up to all the mental progress I was making, and it still felt unsafe. So I really had to slow down and reconnect with my body. And that's where the somatics came in, and make sure that I was also focusing on learning how to feel safe in my body and really embodying what that meant instead of just having it be a concept in my brain.
Yes, I love that you said the word safe. That is one of like, I mean, and I will say from my own experience, and thank you for sharing, like there is that, part of therapy is like that whole mindset and looking at things, but as I'm learning, trauma and maybe, emotions are stored in your body. I mean, they come up as physical symptoms and as that's your body telling you something is wrong or something, and that's why I think listening to our bodies is of the utmost importance because I've said that I just got off the phone with somebody and I was just, she was having like a health issue and I was just checking in on her and she was explaining it and I just said I was like I say this all the time but and it's a quote, it's a title of a famous book, but it's the body does keep the score.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think for people who've been through trauma, especially complex trauma, like if you've grown up in a home where you've kind of been taught that you need to ignore your instincts, like
Hmm.
fear or any of your gut instincts, then you learn it's very hard to connect with them later on in life because it doesn't feel safe. You've learned to ignore them and you learn to repress them. So even though it sounds like something that's really simple, it can, take some time to learn how to reconnect with your body if it hasn't felt safe to in the past.
Yeah, I actually had somebody on the podcast. Her name is Monica Weber, and she's now a stress recovery coach, but she had like a very just traumatic I guess upbringing. Like she was in foster care. She went through like so many foster families and she said when she her trauma response was just like basically like fainting. Like and she went as an adult um she this would happen to her. Like she would if something triggered it even in public, with friends, like she would just like basically shut down and like fall down. And like it wasn't until she did, therapy work and she clearly has, complex trauma that she just and she also looked back at her records from when she was younger and there was like actually great documentation for her to look back on and she was like, yeah, something happened. Like, fortunately she was abused when she was younger and that stuck with her for years until she was, before she, and then she had, while she was in her adult relationships. So
Yeah.
definitely, definitely possible.
Yeah, and that makes absolute sense, right? Like, I'm sure that was something that her nervous system and her body like developed
Hmm.
or adapted to because of the circumstances and situations she was in, but that weren't longer serving her, as into adulthood. But it can be so hard to change that because your body doesn't know
Oh,
that that's no longer
100%.
safe, right? Like the
Yep.
feelings are the same. Yeah, I'm sure in those situations of conflict with like friends or family. Yeah, so the same for me. It took me, I'm still learning how to, kind of really be in touch with what my body's trying to tell me. And sometimes it takes me a while, like I might be feeling a little irritable, but it'll take me a little bit to understand why I'm feeling irritable or what's going on. And I'm a lot better at it now, but it is one of those things that like takes practice, and you have to be that I have to be intentional with at least. Sure.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's another thing that I love that you said, like you have to, it takes practice. Like this, like it is self-awareness isn't something we learn in school. Like we don't learn, I mean, at least I don't learn, I didn't when I was in school. Like we don't learn about connecting with our emotions and our bodies. We don't learn to listen to our bodies. Like that's things that and I know nowadays actually like the younger generations, they're coming home with feelings wheels and I love that for them that they're getting more attuned and connected to like the physiological than older generations. But yeah, like I mean, if you weren't taught this in the home, if this wasn't, something that was accepted, then yeah, you will suppress whatever, said emotion that you have and tuck it away until it does resurface. And I also too want to touch upon what you were saying about, feeling safe again. I know this from like my very, very little work I do with somatics, but I know that our nervous systems and our brains are wired to go to what's familiar versus what's like, versus something new. So that's why I think a lot of people, especially in relationships, they will go to like what's unhealthy because that's what their nervous system sees as normal or functional or familiar, even though it might be bad for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I've had that experience myself.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a really chaotic household where I wasn't always physically safe and often not emotionally safe. And, into adulthood, I was doing okay on paper. I had the job and I was paying bills and,
Hmm.
um, I was educated and, everything looked okay, but inside things were still not okay. And sometimes I would get into these relationships. I usually try to be really intentional about them, but occasionally I would get into these relationships that were unhealthy. Like it happened one time, and I was like, that is so strange. I thought it was an aberration. I was like, okay, well, it won't happen again. That was
Hmm.
just something that happened. I don't know what, but wouldn't happen to me again. And then it did happen to me again. Very similar pattern, very unhealthy. And it was because, and I didn't realize it at the time, it was because that's what felt
That's what your
familiar.
nervous system was
Yeah,
trained to do. Yeah.
exactly. I didn't know what a really healthy relationship looked like. For me, I felt like there's a disconnect and this person doesn't really understand me. And how could we ever really have like a relationship? And not that I ever wanted somebody to have gone through a similar situation or
Of
experience
course
with
not.
me,
No. Yeah.
but it's just, I was like, you couldn't possibly understand, right? Because you don't have those experiences. But it was just, I'm glad now I'm with a partner who didn't have the same background as me. And he, what I used to think was like disconnect is just safety and stability. And I
Mhm.
wasn't able to recognize it at the time until I did my own work.
Got it. Like they were disconnecting from you.
I felt
Oh,
disconnected
you felt
because,
disconnected.
yeah, I felt disconnected because, I mean, we do have different attachment styles, but I felt disconnected because um, some of the coping strategies that I had, like I don't really drink now. Not that I think there's anything wrong with it, but
Yeah, yeah.
I was drinking more like in the past before therapy, and it was obviously like a coping mechanism
Oh, yeah,
and,
absolutely.
doing, other
Oh,
things as well, like avoidance. And yeah, I was just like, this person doesn't understand. And we're too different for it to work. But really, it was about me learning how to be in a safe relationship and how to recognize it, not for incompatibility, but for what it actually
yeah,
was.
for safety, and
Yeah.
yeah, not like,
Yeah.
and that's I think that I would love to. I was actually thinking about this before we got on the call, and I was having a discussion with my friend, and I would love to pick your brain on it because this is just where the conversation is going. But, um. I think that we often get into relationships for like obviously like love and caring and because you are connected with them. But I think like I've found in my adult life, like and like I love it. Like, I mean, I actually this woman, Jessica Baum, I'm Instagram friends with her. She has a book called Safe, and it's amazing. She also has a great story. You talked about attachment, where she has a book, Anxiously Attached, where she talks about her how she developed her anxious attachment, and then Safe is kind of like her story of like how she became more secure and how she healed and moved through it because any like as you know your attachment style is not like a diagnosis. It's something that is can change. Like but I think that people I wish society would think of like safety and like emotional safety. I wish they would put it as like the same like hierarchy as like love. Because I think we're like a very like love, like you want love, but it's like if it was emotional safety, I think like we'd have a lot more healthier relationships. I'm just theorizing. That's just my theory, but would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I don't think a lot of people talk about like that component of being emotionally safe and
Yeah,
what that looks like. And for that to exist, like you need to know what emotional safety is and you need to be able to
that is
recognize
true.
it. So I think, it all kind of starts with the self, right? And being able
Yeah.
you need to feel safe with yourself or else you're not going to be able to really feel safe, I think, with anybody else. It's going to
Yep.
be hard to recognize. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Like I didn't recognize it at the time before I learned about attachment styles, but then I learned, I had a little bit of the both, sometimes anxious, sometimes avoidant,
Mhm.
depending on the partner and the situation. And, it'd be really difficult for me, and I'm sure for the partner, because we didn't know what was going to happen and why it was going to happen. But now I feel like I'm definitely moving more towards like the secure attachment.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky enough that I have a partner who is willing to work on these things with me, and have that
Yes.
dialogue. And we do the check-ins and we make sure like we're okay. And when we're not, one of us can kind of step up and be like, hey, I see that there's a misunderstanding. Let's talk about
Yeah.
it, in a way that feels good and safe for both of us when we're both regulated.
Oh, I think I always say a regulated nervous system like is like true like gold. Like I mean like you could tell me like Danielle, I'll give you like $1 billion and like you're gonna be dysregulated like 90% of the time or you'll be regulated 100% of the time. I'd be like, I'd choose regulation any day of the week.
Yeah. And would you mind sharing like what that feels like for you? Because I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, or
Being
how do you know,
regulated
I guess,
or
how do you know
being
when you're
dysregulated.
dysregulated, right? Because I feel
Okay.
like it's
Oh,
different for everybody.
yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And I will say, you being a somatic guide and everything is bodily, it's physiological, has to do with my body. Number one, my sleep is disturbed. I always say like something is off when you're not like and not like like one night here or there that that happens like where you're ruminating but like it's kind of like becomes a pattern. I just when I my sleep gets disturbed I'm like yeah maybe I'm kind of dysregulated. I feel it a lot like get like shallow breath. So I really have to focus on breathing when I'm like kind of stressed or getting towards like that activated or fight or flight stage. What else? I'm trying to think of what other symptoms that I feel. Yeah, just like not like feeling like I just need to like like I can't catch up, you know?
Yeah, right. Like in those, and that's great that you're able to recognize, like, oh, when I start noticing these things or these patterns, like, interrupted sleep, like, oh, that's a cue that I should probably
Hmm.
check in and see if something else is going on. And I know you said you obviously because of the work that you do, you've seen a lot of therapists, and that's going to continue to be a part of like your life. Did it
Yes.
take you a long time to kind of be able to tune in like that and recognize
Oh,
those patterns,
absolutely.
or is it?
This Oh yeah, no, this didn't this I'm like 38. We're going on 38 years of me learning about myself and I'll always be learning, but as you said, like it takes like this didn't happen overnight. Like, the learning and the cues and I had to be in different situations, kind of like you said about your relationship like when you were like and then you saw like different patterns like it's almost like I had to see those patterns come up in my life in like work and like personal relationships and like love and I was like wait like there's something going on here and I was like if you don't learn how to be more self-aware learn what you're like true core self is. I do like I'm a I have very like limited interests because I am becoming a therapist. I all I read about is self-help, personal development, self-growth, like that. Like I'm just in it. Like, and it's taken me, I would say, like, yeah, like all 38 years for me to like get to this place of, and I'm not, of course, like my body still keeps the score. Like if I'm in a in a situation where I am triggered, because everybody has triggers. I mean, we're all human,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, absolutely.
But if I am in a situation, my I say this to my clients too, and I try to say this to myself. Like the point of nervous system regulation isn't just to be like calm and like Zen, pun intended, all the time. Like it's to when you're in a state and you need to make like you need to react, you know the difference between a reaction and a response, you know?
Yes, I
And
love that.
it's like that pause. Like, and that's something that took a lot of practice for me because I'm like, like and that doesn't mean like if you do have a reaction and it's maybe louder than normal, it's okay that that happened, but then you have to like like you said, like you kind of did, like do the work, dig deeper to be like, why did I react that way? Like why didn't I pause and maybe like take a breath before I like reacted in some way? Or why didn't I just say, hey, like let's just say somebody, you're in a communication and something says triggers you, you have a couple choices. You can leave, you can respond, you can pause, like you know what I mean? Like if you go through like the Rolodex of your mind and go through those things, that's when I know I'm regulated because I'm like, all right, like you're you're trying to respond and not react.
Yeah,
Not saying reactions are bad. They're not bad.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I love the way you put that, right? That pause is so crucial because I feel like that pause signals like control, right? And like
Hmm.
agency. Like I get to decide how
Yeah.
I want to respond in the situation as opposed to feeling just kind of like hijacked by your emotions and have that
Hmm.
knee-jerk reaction. And sometimes that can lead to regrets. And, when we start
Absolutely.
feeling
Yeah,
like
like,
out of control.
exactly the spiral that goes through it. And I
Yes.
will say too, for the listeners out there and for, everybody is that like, and this is my like big like I guess the myth about emotions is that like everybody's like, oh, could like control. No, we don't. We're humans. We're gonna have emotions. They can't be controlled. They can only be managed. And that's,
Yeah.
I guess, that managing is what the magic of what regulation does is you're able to, it's like I'm trying to think of a metaphor. It's like being in like a calm sea versus a stormy sea. You know what I mean? It's like you're on a boat and if it's calm, you're able to navigate it better versus if it's really rocky and you're all over the place, like it's going to be harder to steer the ship. So, it's like that's when you're dysregulated. When you're regulated is when like the sea is calm and you're like, okay, like
Yeah.
I can see the horizon. I can, but like, and it's, but also too, it's, oh, we're human. We're gonna get dysregulated at some point or another,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
yeah, and for me, like I still sometimes have situations, that can cause reactions that perhaps or like emotional responses that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think like for me, what I've really learned about like, being regulated is having that emotional flexibility and not being calm all the time, but being able to make like good, healthy choices when I am dysregulated and have the tools to be able to go back into regulation, right? So like if something happens and I feel like, let's say, really hurt or whatever with my
Hmm.
partner, if I know I'm not in the space where I can respond the way I want to, I can take some time away, be with those feelings, of whatever's coming up. It
Yeah.
might be connected to the past, which it usually is, and,
Yeah.
whatever insecurities, process those, be with those, and then have a conversation if, I want to address it further or not. So
You
yeah.
just said another one of my favorite words, process. I am
Yeah.
and that's what I think, and I would love your perspective on this being as somebody that has gone to therapy. That's why I seek therapy. And not to say like, of course there's other reason, but I would say the biggest reason I seek therapy is I've learned about myself from doing work on myself that I process things by like talking it out. That helps me. Like, and it could be something minor, it could be something major. And like that to me is my safe space of like nobody's judging me. I can sit here and talk to my therapist and just, and also too, I'm sure you know, as working in like a service client driven role, like a lot of it you're taking in. So that's my like time where I'm like, no, like I get some service, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, no, I would love to know your kind of your thoughts on just like therapy, and because I know sometimes people like think like, oh, it's just all it is looking in the past, and no, like no, that you make it what you want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like mental health, is a topic I think that we're both passionate about. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, like therapy, it's not easy. It's not easy to always
No.
find a therapist and to
No.
find one that really relate with and establish like that trusting relationship with. But like you said, it could be whatever you want it to be. And I think sometimes the reason people get so like disheartened or kind of quit before they really give therapy as a chance is because they have maybe they go to like the first person that's either recommended by their insurance or that they find. And if
Hmm.
they don't kind of, vibe, then they're like, okay, it's just not for me. It's not going to work. Or they'll go to somebody, but aren't really clear on what they want to get out of therapy. So then, in a few sessions, 3 or 4 sessions, they're like, well, my whole life isn't better. So what's the point? And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I
Hi.
think it's because, like I said, we're not taught these skills. And for me, I think it's really important to know, like, what are your goals from therapy? What do you want to work on?
Hmm.
Does this individual have experience with those? Like, what is your goal about, like, how long are you comfortable being in therapy? Like, so many things that we need to think about, like, beforehand. And I know I did when I got really serious because I went to a few therapists before, maybe just like two, I think I tried two, and they didn't quite work out, and that was okay. And
It's okay. That happens all the time,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And I think part of it too, for me, if I'm being really honest, I wanted to be like, okay, I tried. Obviously, it's not for me. Like somewhere in my brain, I think I was also kind of copping out a little bit. And for the second person I went to, I was a little more intentional, but I remember it was just uncomfortable. Like for me, one of my patterns that I knew like usually was heading into like a depressive episode was when I started to have a drink every night and when I would order takeout instead of like actually making meals. So when those things were happening, I knew it was because, you know, I needed to like check in. So I went to see a therapist when those symptoms started showing up. And he was like, oh, I think you're fine. He's like, I have a drink every night and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I was like, absolutely, that's not, but it's not, it means something's usually going on for me when that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it didn't quite work out. Weren't quite on the same page, which is okay. And he was like, oh, it sounds like you have symptoms of PTSD, but he never wanted to like, we just moved past it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
He wanted to talk about something else, which is fine, but it just wasn't a good fit. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and the person I did find who I did EMDR with, she's amazing, wonderful. I told her my goals. I told her, and yeah, it was like you said, it's exactly what you want it to be, what you make of it. And when we started to do EMDR, the first few minutes in, I was like, oh, I'm not really comfortable. I was like, come
Yeah.
stop.
Oh, I've never done it myself. I believe my therapist might be certified in it, but like I've never done it. But like, I mean, so I don't know what the setting is. Like, are you in like a dark room?
No,
Oh,
no,
oh.
and I
I'm
saw
like,
her.
I'm like, sorry. I'm like,
No,
I was like thinking about.
we were doing it over Zoom, but I
Oh,
spent
you
a
can do it
lot.
over Zoom?
We did it over Zoom. Not
Oh, wow.
everybody will, but we were doing it over
Yeah,
Zoom,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I felt actually more comfortable with that. But I did,
Interesting.
yeah. So you do go back to the memories. I felt really uncomfortable with that. I was like, I spent so much time trying not to think about those things, so to intentionally go into them was like, and she
Yeah,
was
like
like, yeah.
re-traumatizing
Yeah, and
yourself.
she was like, "Of course we can stop, but then you're not going to get any of the benefits." And I was like, "Okay." So
Yeah.
then we kept going. But, I mean, she always gave me choice, right? So it was, if I hadn't wanted to do MDR, we would have probably tried something else. So yeah, like you
That's
said, it can be
interesting.
whatever
I
you
didn't
want
know
it
you
to
could
be.
do it over Zoom. I had
Yeah,
no
so
idea.
a lot of people do like with like the finger and the eye movements,
Yeah,
crying,
yeah.
Or it's sometimes up and down. I think now I heard there's also buzzers that some people use,
Mm.
like these buzzers that, yeah. I did it with tapping. So mine was,
Oh, it's so funny. My therapist does tapping. Maybe I should do it with her.
yeah. It
With
wasn't like the emotional freedom technique, like the tapping on the series of body points. It was just we go to the memory, but I was only doing tapping on the chest, like this. I don't know.
interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Because I
Yeah. So
like
there's different ways to do it.
that's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing too. I mean, I'll share too about like like thank you for being so open and honest about using like like sometimes we do use alcohol as a coping mechanism. Like as I say, I'm like you. Like
Yeah.
I do not I'm like I don't care. You can, do whatever you want in your personal life. I like to have a cocktail like everybody else. But when you see it as like a pattern, like almost like needing a drink, like I mean, that's another reason, that's another thing that t ticks, tells me I'm like, hey, I might be a little more stressed than normal if I'm like, oh, like, instead of like, because I always say I drink alcohol and want, whatever to enjoy myself, to sit and like enjoy a nice meal with a nice glass of wine, not just slug it down and get drunk. You know what I mean? Like that's like college, Danielle. Like I'm a grown adult, like, I don't need to, so like, and that's how I want to enjoy my drink, not like, oh gosh, I need to have a drink to for it to be a source of relief, you know?
Yeah, and that's what I realized like during COVID where everybody started drinking more.
Mm.
I realized that's when I really stopped because I realized, oh, when I drink, it's mostly because I do feel stressed. I am using it as a coping mechanism, not as something to like enhance enjoyment or like a social setting. And that's when I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to drink anymore when I notice that happening, when I notice I'm stressed. And it really cut out almost all my drinking. And now it's only like, on special occasions or when I like a glass of
Yeah,
champagne. Yeah.
but as you said, it should be a source of enjoyment, like not like it should be like, it should be something that you're not. And that's, I guess, how you can tell if it's like a maladaptive or like, and I will say, like, one of the main things, sorry, I hope like this conversation is going on a little different of a path, but hey, we're gonna go there. One of the tells that I actually know from a client, from myself, I'm like, if I'm like, I always ask people with drinking, especially specifically, depending on the amount or whatever. And I'm also very honest with my therapist about like my drinking and my substance use. But when it comes to like, if it does seem to be like more of a pattern or more frequent, I then ask myself or said client, like, what are you numbing? Because essentially it's just like, why don't you want to feel, oh sorry, my camera just went out a little bit.
No worries.
Um like, it's like it's because I will say alcohol is a great way to not feel what you're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as somebody who like from when I was really young, I developed a lot of like unhealthy what I call coping strategies, some like the disordered eating and the self-harm. And because I didn't drink a lot, I didn't think alcohol was a part of that. And I didn't realize, like when I kind of left some of those other strategies behind, I was using some more acceptable strategies to kind of like sneak in there and replace some of the other ones, that I had, put aside or tried to work through before in the past. So it is really interesting. Yeah, you have to kind of like look inward and be like, hey, where's this coming from? Like, what's the cause of
Mhm.
this? Am I comfortable with it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, and like it goes for like, I mean, with anything, right? Like doing anything excessively, like eating, even good things. Like I always say, people that work out, like I wish I liked to work. I wish that was my coping mechanism because I'd be like, man, I would like, but like people that do it excessively, that are almost like, too ritual about it, you have to be like, because of course, like on the other side, like exercise gives you endorphins. Like, of course, those are great chemicals. Like, but if you were like maybe running like 20 miles a day, like I think that's a little excessive. Like I'm gonna question, like, all right, like where's why, you know?
Yeah, it's so interesting how intent plays into all that, right? Like in the
Yes.
past, I used to exercise, I think, more as a form of like punishment for myself almost,
Mm.
right? And now it's more of a self-care.
Oh,
And,
nice.
I want to stay healthy and I want to move my body and I want to feel better, as opposed to like, this is something I need to do because of, I overate or there was a lot of emotional eating. So now I have to like make up for it. So yeah, absolutely intent has so much to do with it. So interesting, right? Even our like
Yeah.
the healthy outlets. Yeah.
Yeah. When did that shift happen for you? When you kind of were like from like punishment to being more like self-care, that like shit. I mean, I'm sure it took time
Yeah, yeah, I would probably say therapy, EMDR during that time.
during,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, like everything kind of, I realized like there were so many things in my life that I wasn't happy with. And for the longest time, I thought it was me, it was my personality. I didn't
Mm.
know that these were strategies that I adapted to kind of, survive and cope with some of the experiences I've had in childhood. And when I was able to real, and I didn't have any of the language, right? Because we
Mm.
talked about this, like, mental health in certain communities, like, is almost seen
Yeah,
as a bit of a stigma. And
absolutely.
I hadn't known anybody who'd been in therapy or had really prioritized mental health in like my world. So I didn't have any of the language and it wasn't really talked about in school. So I didn't know like that these were responses that I could work on by going back and healing some of the past. So instead I was like, I try not to think about it. I avoided it. I was like, it's in the past. There's no need. It was all about managing symptoms in the present. And obviously, like it got overwhelming and I needed
Mhm.
to go kind of get to the root cause of it. Yeah. So
Well,
that's
it's
when
so
I started to change. Yeah.
You just said exactly where I was like thinking, so we're on the same wavelength that like you can only treat symptoms for so long. Like put band-aids on them until you do have to dig deeper and get to that root cause. And for everybody, that journey is different and it shows up differently in your life. And I hate to say this, some people never they just they continuous on the same pattern and that's okay with them. Like if they don't want to, if you, I'm not forcing inner work on anybody, but I think it's so powerful because once you, as you said, do regain that agency, you're able to like, actually like, live your life, not let life, run you. It's like you are intentionally walking through your life and making conscious choices that are, you know, um, aligned with who you are.
Yeah, in your values,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it took me being in therapy to learn like I was living so much of my life out of alignment with like the
Mm.
values I had, which of course was causing as well a lot of the like the unhappiness and, more of like the unhealthy coping strategies. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And for
Yeah,
me, I
or
know.
no,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no. Oh no, you go. Sorry.
I said for me too, like I just, like I said, I didn't have a language. I wasn't aware.
Yeah.
And now it's so funny because, we're in these spaces and we hear about it all the time and people talk about it constantly and we're reading all the books. But, prior to that, like it just wasn't
No.
in my world. So,
Yeah.
I really feel for people who, might just be thinking like, oh, this is just who I am, or this is just the way I'm wired, or, this is how everybody in my family is. Like there's another way. Like if you've been
Yeah.
through situations, yeah, there could be something else out there for you. Yeah.
Well, even just using the term, going to what you were like saying, even just using the term nervous system regulation, so, depending on who I'm talking to, I
Yeah.
have to adjust that. Like you know what that means, but a lot that's not like I wouldn't say is as common as a term as like mental health,
Yeah.
like people don't know fight, flight, freeze or fawn, like
Yeah.
the survival responses of our nervous system. So like depending on who I'm talking to, and I'm not saying I dumb it down, but I'm like, oh, like when you feel like this, like I connect it to a feeling because then I'm like, all right, because everybody has them. And I'm sure if you're a grown adult in this world, you've, probably had some stress in your life. So, so you know how to feel. And that's kind of also to me su subtly being like, potentially therapeutic of like, all right, that feeling, like that's this. Like I just said, name it. Like, let's name it.
Yeah. Yeah. And naming it is so helpful, right? Sometimes it's like you don't need to necessarily label everything, but sometimes it just helps so much to understand like what's happening and why.
Well, I will
Yeah.
say something I mean, but this doesn't apply to everything, but for most things, especially emotions, there's a saying in the therapeutic community, you have to name it to tame it. And it's
Yeah.
just like you kind of you have to like you have to know what it is. And that's like anything. Like you can't change something you don't understand. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like you have to understand what's going on within you to then be able to manage it. Like, and if you don't under and it, I don't know how deep that for some things it could be a very shallow understanding, but so for some things you need to go a little deeper.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And for me, I know like I kind of did that progression of like feeling like everything, all my emotions were something to manage and my feelings, and then finally something to just like accept and let flow through, right? Like
Hmm.
let it be expressed in a safe way. And then I have a much better like relationship now, I think, with like my body and
Yeah.
my emotions when I wasn't in constant struggle with them or trying to control everything that was happening.
Well, like I think when you try to either control them or even suppress them, or they get louder, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think like I
Absolutely.
I've learned that in my own way of like what even when you like it's like even I mean sorry I keep going back to this but it's just a good example like even like the chemical components of alcohol like alcohol is a depressant so like if you think about it like you're trying to make yourself feel better but you're using something that is like depressing your system so it's gonna work in like I mean people always say like the next morning people just call it the kids call it like what like anxiety like that's
Mhm.
why you have like anxiety because it's a chemical in your body doing something the opposite of, what not dopamine, excuse me. I'm trying to think of the I think difference like it's not like oxytocin or it's not endorphins. It's the opposite. So,
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I agree, right? And that's why, yeah, like you said, sometimes I know I have a friend who's like, sometimes when he's feeling upset, he'll have a few drinks and then he's like, I feel worse for the next 2, 3 days.
yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
totally
yeah.
you do. And then after you hit a certain age, I mean, like I was just talking to
Yes.
my business coach this morning, and I was like, man, after you hit that, there, after you cross that 35 threshold, even 30, I'm like, it's not the same.
I know, right? You hear people talk about it all the time, but I think until you actually experience it yourself, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not gonna happen to me. Yeah.
Well, Zen, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. I could talk to you all day. So for my listeners out there, I know your website is lovezen.com, and I love her website, by the way. It's great, but if people want to work with you, what is the best way to contact you?
I would say yeah, through my website, and I'm
Okay,
also on
great.
Instagram for at Love Zen. But yeah, I do one-on-one, and I'm looking into expanding into like group sessions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much for being on. I appreciate it.
yeah. Thank you, Danielle.
Of course. And as per usual, you can find the Feeling and Healing podcast on YouTube as well as Apple Podcasts and Spotify.